my P's. Hey everybody, thank you for joining us. We're just waiting for a few more folks to come online here, and we're going to get started shortly with our programming. Dr. Kellyanne Fitzpatrick from Red Monk is going to be leading the charge. We're super excited to have her joining us. We'll be getting ready soon. While we're waiting, if you could exercise your fingers and make sure that the chat is working. I'm going to be referring to you folks in chat a lot today. Communication and collaboration requires communication and collaboration. So we're gonna hope that you're gonna join in on that as well.
We're going to be very meta today.
Exactly. Yeah. Going to communicate and collaborate on communication and collaboration. Scottsdale, Arizona. Hello. All right. I love it. Hello, chat. This is great. Canada. Very nice. Very
Hey everyone,
good.
this is just a reminder to when you're typing in the chat, if you want everyone to see your response, make sure it's filtered to all panelists and attendees, not just all panelists.
Colorado, hello. Very good. Amsterdam, Mexico. Fantastic chat. I love it. Love to see it.
All places I would like to go to when we can travel again.
Right. More from Canada, from Malaysia. This is amazing. India. So many people staying up. Croatia. Either getting up early or staying up late to listen to the conversation, to collaborate and communicate. I love it. From Italy. Buongiorno. Nigeria. Fantastic. So I think we should probably go ahead and get started. We've got a lot to cover. We have some really exciting content and some great panelists. So Kellyanne, can I ask you to start? Let's go to the next slide. Welcome everybody to the Software Delivery and Leadership Forum. Today's topic, as I've been saying over and over again, is communication, collaboration, and rapid response through software. Communication and collaboration is critical in any software organization, but today, in the face of extreme disruption, we think they're even more critical. So today we're going to be talking about how organizations are using DevOps principles and practices, how they're using different technologies to respond rapidly to changing needs and unprecedented demand. We're going to be talking about how software is evolving to meet new market realities, how organizations are adapting to distributed work, and how DevOps practices could help in our new normal. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, our featured speaker today is Dr. Kellyanne Fitzpatrick, an industry analyst over at Red Monk. Hi, Kelly.
Hello, happy to be here today.
Oh, super excited to have you here. We also have some wonderful panelists who will be coming online after Kelly is done giving us a primer on collaboration and communication. Before we get to that, next slide, please. I've mentioned this earlier. For those of you who have not been on here before, we're actually looking at the data and we're seeing a tremendous number of repeat offenders on the program. So I want to thank everybody who's continually logging in and joining us for this conversation, folks from all over the world, which is super amazing for us to be seeing. We want to make this program for you. This is not for us. And so when you're in the chat and you're listening in, be engaged, ask questions. These folks who are available on the panel and available as speakers are here to help provide you with the information that you're going to need to manage your software delivery better, manage your business better. So we're looking for you to engage and ask questions and answer questions that are asked. We want everyone to be feeling included and welcome. So please no disrespectful talk or you'll just be booted from the program. A lot of you have already done this. I appreciate it. Give it a try. Where are you joining us from? We got folks from all over the world. Keep it coming in the chat. With that, I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide. And ask Kelly, I'm going to ask you to take it away.
Sure, I think there we are, we're good.
Awesome.
So as Sam mentioned, Kelly Fitzpatrick, I am an analyst at Red Monk. Red Monk is a very developer-focused kind of analyst firm. I also, in a former life, and kind of still am, a medievalist, which is why we're going to talk Monty Python meets today. And I've also been in the software industry for over a decade as a tech writer, a QA analyst, and a release manager. And I've taught technical communication to computer science majors at Georgia Tech. But enough about me. We are here to talk about communication today. And this is something I've spent a lot of time thinking about over the past, however many decades. It's a term that you probably are all familiar with. We're going to start with a very kind of quick working definition of communication as how people transmit meaning from one person to another. And I want to start today by giving us some terms and some ideas that will help us kind of think and talk about communication in general, not just as it pertains to work or software, although we certainly will get to how communication involves all of those things. So the first word I want to look at today is media, which again, like communication itself, is something that should be familiar to all of us. And just kind of a quick definition, we often think of media as the press. Here we're talking about it as the specific forms through which people transmit meaning to each other, such as a webinar or a blog post or a tweet or a film. And in fact, I used the medium of a tweet in preparation for this talk to poll folks on what medieval-esque film I should use to help demonstrate some of the other terms I'm going to talk about today. And Twitter told me that I should use Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which is a 1975 film. It is full of non sequiturs, which are communicative acts that seem out of context, and they actually are. It also has a lot of kind of meta media going on. So if you haven't caught it yet, I highly recommend it. It's on Netflix, but I wouldn't watch it at work. So moving on, we all understand media. Another term that I want to talk about in relation to communication is modes. And when we talk about modes of communication, we're talking about the manner or method of communication, not necessarily the very precise form that it takes. And while there are many, for our purposes, I'm going to borrow from my postdoc institution, Georgia Tech, the Writing and Communication program at Georgia Tech, which is basically where all of their first year comp and many of their tech comp courses kind of are housed, including the ones where I came from. They use this woven acronym to talk about 5 modes that they focus on when they're teaching communication. Some of them are very self-explanatory, written, oral, or spoken, and visual. And the last 2, maybe a little bit of explanation is needed. So electronic modes of communication, we could talk about this all day, but a great example is kind of like a hyperlink. Precise. It's a very precisely electronic form of communication. And most of you probably used a hyperlink in order to register for this talk today. And the last one, nonverbal forms of communication. Again, we could talk about this a lot, but some examples, think eye contact, which is very different on video conferencing than it is in person. Posture, body language. You'll see me talking with my hands a lot. And even things like voice intonation, which we all use to different effects when we communicate. So moving on, quick kind of example and an idea of how kind of modes work together. Here we have from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the picture of the book of the film. The book itself is using both written and visual modes of communication. And then the film part of this also adds a kind of narration. So you've got that kind of oral or spoken component as well. And it's a really good example of how most media and most kind of communicative acts actually are multimodal, meaning they use more than one of those modes of communication. So another aspect—
they actually made a film out of the book of the film. I think they did.
They did. And if that's another thing that I'd be like, all right, we need to watch that. Put that on your to watch list.
Yeah.
So another aspect of communication I want to make sure we cover is the idea of synchronous versus asynchronous communication. And this is something that you've probably heard a lot, especially those of you who have anything to do with education, the debate over whether classes should be synchronous or asynchronous since they've kind of moved online. But some other examples, face-to-face kind of spoken conversations, most happen synchronously. And this example from the film, you've got it absolute kind of communications fail as someone fails to give instructions to his guards. But keep in mind that kind of spoken or oral communication can also be asynchronous. For example, think about the recording of this talk for those of you who are kind of watching this after the fact. You're not getting it at the same time that I'm delivering, what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Another way to think of it.
So I'm going to interrupt you there for just one second, but the chat that folks are engaging with and able to ask us questions, that will not exist in the asynchronous world. So the folks who are here enjoying this live are able to engage and collaborate, not just listen to it asynchronously, which is interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great example of kind of a written mode of written communication as kind of synchronous. Because we often think of things like writing a book as something that is asynchronous, because your readers are going to read that book way after you've written it. But the chat tools like Slack and the ones that those of you who are live here have access to through the kind of Zoom webinar tools, that's a synchronous form of written communication, which is kind of great. So now that we have, some kind of communication terminology to get started, I want to talk about some of the technologies that have drastically changed how we communicate over the years. We like to think about technology as something that's happened in the last 5 minutes or, 5 months or 5 years, but we have a huge history of communication technologies. And the first one I want to talk about today is the printing press, which arrived, in Europe around, about 1440. Most of you have heard about Gutenberg. It is a tool that has enabled us to produce writing at scale and at relative speed and at configurable, highly configurable because of movable type. And if you can imagine written communication as being something that can be distributed at much greater scale than it ever had been before, that's what you get with something like the printing press. The kind of ramifications of something like the printing press means that, say, the English language itself actually becomes more standardized and changes less after the introduction of the printing press and its kind of widespread use. So if you think about, see, the Old English poem Beowulf from around 1000, which if you looked at it, you wouldn't even be able to understand some of the characters, versus the Middle English, I think from Chaucer around 1400, which you might be able to kind of pick through, versus Shakespeare, which is 200 years from Chaucer. We consider that to be modern English, even though it's 400 years old. And those of you who had to take Shakespeare in your English class might think of it as too flowery and not necessarily your favorite English, but it is modern English. So the printing press helped make that kind of almost stability of an entire language happen.
So it's sort of the way that we talked about it before. It's like the deployment automation for words, right? Just standardizes the way you get the words out there, which allows people to sort of depend on a standard way of doing it, which is interesting. And you'd mentioned, I don't know if it's coming up next, the movable type.
I did mention that, and the kind of pairing of movable type with the actual printing press technology is really, really important, because we've had block printing way before the kind of printing press as we know it. But movable type actually is part of the game-changing.
Cattle, not pets, right?
Yes, absolutely. So the next technology I want to cover is the telegraph. This is a great example of electronic mode of communication. And also, while folks have tried to devise other methods of sending information quickly, like pennants or beacons or birds, the telegraph is really the first time that information can systematically move faster than a human can. And I'm going to pause there. So that's when someone actually described the telegraph to me as such, and I think that was sometime when I was in grad school, that really struck me. That's a big game-changing moment, to the point where if you look at the rapidity of the technologies that kind of follow that, so think about sound recording, the telephone, film recording, the entity that I'm just going to call the internet. For sake of brevity, those happen fairly quickly after the telegraph makes information travel much more quickly.
Once we got a taste of being able to broadcast what we wanted and to get feedback quickly, we leaned in pretty good as a humanity, which is good.
We use that technology to develop even better communicative technology, which is great. And it means, among other things, that if I have internet access, I can access media such as the film that I need screenshots from my home. I can participate in webinars, and I can use the internet and some other tools to leverage social media like Twitter to collaborate on what final Monty Python meme I should use in my talk today. The meme, the meme is another example of like kind of evolving media forms. And it's actually really fascinating. There's a great book called Because Internet by Gretchen McCullough that I recommend if you're interested in memes or emojis or anything like that. And in terms of the specific meme that Twitter chose, I probably would have gone with Monty Python and the Holy Grail, a meme from there, but Twitter chose a meme inspired by the Argument Clinic sketch from Monty Python's Flying Circus series. And that is so very on brand for Twitter, very much so. And now on to something completely different. Moving on to collaboration, the second part of kind of our group of topics today. And collaboration, again, this is a word that should be very familiar to most of you. Kind of quick definition, you can think of collaboration as multiple entities working together on anything. And as you can imagine, it's very dependent on communication. So one of the reasons that we have those paired today as our kind of topic of conversation, those of you who are all about DevOps, you know that collaboration is recognized as a key component of DevOps. And in terms of technology, technology has evolved to make collaboration less dependent on co-location, like very much so. And the continued emphasis on collaboration and productivity software coming out of folks like Microsoft and Google, there's been a lot of talk about collaboration paired with productivity. So that's a fairly hot topic, not just among people who develop software, but people who are just trying to go about their jobs, right? And going about our jobs has certainly been very different lately. Our collaborative processes have been disrupted by the global COVID-19 pandemic. Many of us are newly remote or more thoroughly remote than we were before. We've been working through disruptions in travel, childcare, all of our productivity rituals. We've been doing this while also dealing with high levels of anxiety and grief. And one thing that I've heard again and again is the idea of establishing a new normal. And while this can mean many things to many people, and there's probably no new normal that applies to everyone, a lot of the new normal for those of us who kind of can work from home and do the type of work that at least I do, has been established through software. So for instance, we've been using more conferencing software such as Zoom. We've been using event software for conferences. I spent most of this week at KubeCon Europe, which is a virtual experience. And one of our panelists, Tracy Miranda, actually gave a great talk, but everything done through this kind of online platform. And we've also things like increased demand for online training and education, which has to do partly with the fact that folks are looking for something to do because we're still kind of stuck at home, but also people are looking for ways to upskill as a way to either get a new job or to kind of get some type of job security in what are in fact uncertain times. In terms of kind of a peek at how we're using software differently, this is a Twitter card from an article that the New York Times published all the way back in April, looking at how the daily US usage of Netflix has gone up. Daily US usage of ESPN.com went down, and then Zoom usage, this was kind of snapshotted just at the beginning where Zoom usage was starting to kind of skyrocket. I have since pulled some global monthly numbers from February to July, and that Zoom trend up continued well until April. And if you're looking at the idea of the new normal as still being in flux, it's really interesting to see that around April is where you have both Netflix and Zoom usage globally, kind of peaking. And you can almost see where, some of us started going back to the office. And maybe when schools started getting out and started using Zoom less. So I think we could talk about maybe this chart for a long time, but I'm not going to, since we have
what's clear,
many other
Kellyanne,
things.
is that people are watching movies more than they're working, which is, that's good.
Or if you're like me, you have to watch movies as part of your job. So
That's right. It's your work.
Yeah.
I'm doing research. Exactly.
It's very important to do that type of research, in this day and age.
So we are 20 minutes in, just time check.
Okay. I got a few more minutes and then we'll wrap things up. So I want to talk a little bit about not just how we are using software differently, but how software itself has had to respond to the kind of conditions of us using software en masse and in different ways. So examples of this, great example of this would be the security changes that Zoom had to make to address things like Zoom bombing and other concerns. The development of tracing apps, delivery platforms of all kind, and new demands in capacity, scale, and performance, which none of these should be kind of new topics to you, but I just wanted to make sure that we had them like in our mind. And then also I wanted to raise a couple problems and gaps that even with all of these, kind of software innovations and, responses and adaptations that we're still seeing, one of them being access. So tech infrastructure, space, do you have a room where you can work? Changes in productivity schedules and rituals, work-life balance, things that we are kind of running into. There's that saying that we're no longer working from home, we're just living at work. And then Zoom fatigue, which I understand the irony of talking about this on a webinar that I think is using Zoom, right? And what you see here is a chart from Microsoft on what our brainwaves do during video meetings. This is a very small study, but I think it's really great. And you can see that our brainwaves actually drop off around 30 minutes. And there's been a lot of articles coming out, especially in the past couple of weeks, talking about how we're all tired of Zoom, that it's actually exhausting for us to be adapting to communicating without having the same kind of nonverbal social cues that we're used to in person. And also that we're using it more and more for things like formal engagements and not like informal ones. And even when we do, they're kind of running into each other. Your happy hour and your work meeting are feeling kind of the same. So there are still definitely gaps in the way we're using software. And one thing that we're going to get to this later when we get to our panel discussion is, what about DevOps? Is there any ways that the way that we do DevOps or the way we think about DevOps or DevOps practices can actually, kind of help us, address some of these problems and gaps? I won't give you a laundry list, but some things to kind of keep top of mind is that, DevOps very much is one of the parts that helps us bring the rapid into rapid response of software. It is already something that embraces collaborative culture. We're years into a tools versus culture debate when it comes to DevOps. So kind of applying that to how do we actually, work when most of us are kind of newly remote. And then most importantly, and this is the thought that I'll leave you with, is that DevOps is very much a user and human-centric way of looking at the world. And this is a great quote from Emily Freeman's book, DevOps for Dummies, that DevOps is a philosophy, one that prioritizes people over process and process over tooling. And with that thought, I'm going to hand things back to you, Sam, so that you can bring in some more lovely and brilliant humans for our panel discussion.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Wonderful primer on that topic of communication and collaboration. I do enjoy how meta it is, and to the point of how long these things should be. Originally, the SDLFs were an hour and a half long because we had so much good stuff up front and we wanted to give time for folks to talk on the panel, but we realized that we were getting a lot of people dropping off. And your scientific chart said it a lot better than our gut instinct could, but people don't want to sit for too long without that engagement. We're hoping that the engagement that we're going to get on the chat is going to help make this a little bit more lively. So let's get to it. Can you go to the next slide?
Sure.
And we're going to ask our other panelists, if they would, to turn on their cameras. And let's go through a round of introductions. I'm going to start on the left here on the screen that I'm seeing and just ask Mark. Mark, would you introduce yourself, please? Welcome to the panel.
Thanks so much. I'm Mark Settle. I am a 7-time CIO, and I've worked for 2 enterprise software companies, BMC Software and Okta most recently.
Wonderful. Well, we're happy to have you here. Thank you for joining us. Mitch Ashley, welcome.
Hey, yep, I'm just trying to get my camera working here. I'll be on just a minute, but thanks, Sam. Great to be on with you again. Mitch Ashley, CEO with the Accelerated Strategies Group, focusing on DevOps, digital transformation, cloud, cybersecurity, right in the heart of what we're doing. And I'm also a former CIO myself, so good to be on.
Lovely. Thank you for joining us. And Tracy, last but not least.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tracy. I'm Director of Open Source at CloudBees, and I'm Board Chair at the Continuous Delivery Foundation. So big fan of all things open source.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of collaboration response, involved in open source, I imagine, right? In any software delivery for that matter. Next slide, please. So the topics that we've got, and we've shared these things with the panelists, but the chat, you folks are seeing it for the first time. So the topic of conversation right now are communication and collaboration patterns. How have they changed within your organization or within organizations that you're working with? Maybe this has been since March. Maybe this is in a longer time frame or in a shorter time frame. But how are those communication patterns, the communication and collaboration changing? Mark, you're at the top of my screen here. So I'm going to just ask you, at the folks that you're talking to, the teams that you've led, how are communication and collaboration patterns changing?
So I'm coming to you live from the Bay Area, and I have the benefit of reflecting on some of the stories and experiences that I've heard from my peers here over the last 5 months or so. So obviously there are a number of software engineering teams that are already highly distributed, and they have dealt with these issues for a long time. And I think equally obviously the ones that had a kind of a core central team, and a lot of our cloud native Bay Area startups love to live and work in the Bay Area. So many of them are pretty much centralized here, even if they have satellite operations in like Seattle or Toronto or in India or someplace else. So those are the ones that have probably struggled the most with the changes that have occurred. So a couple of the themes I think have recurred frequently. It all revolve around actually planning asynchronous work, because as Kellyanne pointed out, we're living at work these days, and people have other things to do during the day by virtue of the fact that they're at home. So whether it's tending to the medical needs of a relative or a relation, or it's walking the cats that Kellyanne does every day, or it has to do with parenting. There's sort of interruptions that would not have normally occurred, in an office kind of a setting. And so I think it's probably pretty shocking to people how much they relied on casual social interaction to get work done. I mean, it has for me. In IT, we've complained a long time about context switching that occurs during the day if you're working with multiple applications and database. But the social context distractions and switching that occur is something I never really thought too much about. But in the current situation where everybody has maybe 2 hours of commuting time, given back to them, and they're sort of a slave to the screen for, an extended period of time during the day, with their own personal needs, this asynchronous problem is something that you just can't kind of casually leave to the reader or leave to the employee to figure out on their own, because, Kellyanne's catwalking time is probably asynchronous to my, my bourbon hour at the end of every day, that I need my therapy, at like 4:30. I can't really be processing emails after 4:30. So I think these organizations that did have core teams have really had to develop some rules actually about asynchronous work. And it's trite to say, but a lot of it has to do with more stringency around documentation, so that somebody can pick up something that you've done or get a status, or that would have been done maybe much more casually face-to-face on the way to the lunchroom.
Just put it in the wiki.
Yep. So I mean, that's kind of happened. And then I think the other thing that we've talked about Zoom fatigue a lot, but there's this other phenomenon of Slack channel sprawl. And there's just, you've really got to be careful that you're not, that the staff isn't going crazy trying to keep up with all the Slack messaging. And so I think, again, some rules around how you can label different channels, like almost like, this requires your attention in the normal course of business. This, you can, if I don't hear from you for like 2 days, that's fine. It's more of an informational kind of a thing. And I think organizations have found the need to do that more by default than design, right? They kind of back their way into the problem. Then they've kind of had to come up with some rules about how to manage it.
Yeah, absolutely. Kellyanne, I'm going to ask you, can you, if you'd like, I see that there's some like your computer wants to put up pretty pictures, which is fine. Do you want to stop that sharing? Because I think people got the question, and then this way we can see everyone's faces.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, and then I can share the next slide later because we don't need to absolutely have that up. And here now, hopefully people can see everyone's faces, which would be more engaging than a slide with just one person's face.
And I can actually get to the Q&A without disrupting my screen
Right,
share.
good. Yeah, exactly. Very good. All right, cool. All right. So, Mark, thank you for that. Absolutely. Some very interesting points. And the whole idea around helping to structure those Slack channels and you don't want to have too micro a niche of a topic where it's never going to get anyone looking at it, but you also don't want to overload it. There's a lot that needs to go into, and we have this at CloudBees where we have lots of Slack channels and there's like a librarian effort to try and curate those and make sure that we get reminders every week saying, here, these ones haven't really been used. Do you want to use them anymore?
Sam, just for reference, I was chatting with the CIO at Slack last week, and I said, how many messages do you get every day? I just can't even imagine. And he's on 1,500 channels. He said, you have to develop kind of your own methodology of how to process those things, like how to deal with that flow. Anyway.
Right. Yeah. Well, these are the new challenges for communication and collaboration. Mark, thanks. Tracy, let me go to you next. What are you seeing? What are some trends and changes that you're seeing in communication and collaboration?
Well, like CloudBees has already been remote. Let's say about 70% of the company was already remote, but I liked how Kellyanne phrased it, that we're more thoroughly remote now. So, everybody's forced to do that. But even like for my own team, you sort of realize that we did rely on, once a quarter, we would all get together, we would meet face-to-face at a conference. And now we're having to be much more deliberate about social interactions. And, to Mark's point as well, we relied on casual social interaction, and now we have to kind of add that in, and it leads to all sorts of kind of creative things. So not just in my team, but with the wider open source communities, we'll have more social, BYOBs, or I don't know if folks ever saw that go-to meeting where you could have a goat attend your meeting, but we've done ones where like people have brought their horses into meeting, and it just, livens it up and tries to make it less tiring, but a nice way to just connect with people. So yeah, just much more deliberate social emphasis.
Why these SDLFs are great, because there's a donkey on every thing. Hi, everybody. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I think it's just definitely not the same, but yeah, lots we can do to just try and compensate for what's missing.
Right. And Mitch, I'm going to hand it to you next. I remember reading something on LinkedIn that got quite a bit of accolades around your process for keeping in touch with people, communicating and collaborating with folks. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that, Sam. It's something that I did as a kind of business entrepreneur. You build such a big network, but you find you only talk to 200 people, right, over the course of time or whatever it is. So about a year and a half ago, when I exited my last company, I don't know where I got the idea. I'm sure I stole it from someone smarter than me, but I decided I would reach out to one person every day that I have not talked to for more than a year. I talked to all the other people, and it was actually really easy to do. I was surprised how easy it was. Just you'd see something go by in LinkedIn, or you'd see something from somebody they're copied. And, I had more great conversations just catching up. And honestly, some of them, one of my mentors that I just started talking with again, I hadn't talked with him since we were much, much early in my career. And a lot of people have said, gosh, that's a really good idea. And you can do it in whatever form. You have to do it exactly how I did it. But it's, I found it just really enriching. And now in this time when, we are isolated and much more, that was very helpful. One thing I do want to add to the conversation is I think we're also beginning to experience an inflection point of all of the electronic communications and how to reinvent how we work, not just use tools to work the way we work. and kind of underlie those. And I posted this on LinkedIn today that my daughter is an actor, and she had her performance canceled because of the COVID situation, thinking she was going to act for another 9 months probably. We got a call, a screenwriter from a movie screenwriter was doing a 4 Zoom performance of a murder mystery. And they redesigned, they built it all around. It was a 4-week, once a week performance. During the week, they recorded all their parts. Zoom was part of, they're all on this meeting. I won't tell you the whole thing. It's called Riddle Puzzle. I can't remember the last part, but that's a great idea of just reinventing something that builds on the medium, not the opposite way around. I think that we're kind of doing that with our work too. We're starting to enter in that.
Very interesting. Yeah. Kellyanne, you have thoughts on that?
You know, I do. And I saw your LinkedIn post on that like this morning. And just yesterday, I had seen a piece in The Atlantic about another movie that it's shot entirely through Zoom, but uses Zoom as part of the setting, and it's called Host, and it's a horror movie. And I was like, oh my God, we've definitely gotten close to peak Zoom fatigue, if that's what we think of as like the new Blair Witch Project.
Well, they just not go too far down that rabbit hole. They added Q&A with the actors in character at the end of each episode. So you couldn't ask them, did you commit the murder? But all this, it was really engaging, kind of leveraging also the medium, not just to deliver, but interact with the audience.
Right. And I'm asking the chat, you know, how are you seeing the patterns of communication and collaboration changing in your own organizations? Because we're interested in seeing some great examples of things that are organization specific, and then just social specific. And but they're all human. They're all human problems. And, you know, there's that great Jeff Goldblum quote, life finds a way, from Jurassic Park. And life finds a way, and we have to communicate. We're communicators.
Can you think back when you this is going a little ways away back, but you remember when you used to have a certain number of magazines that you could subscribe to at any one time and read them all?
Yeah.
Single digit for me. It's like, 7 or 8. Now, how many Slack channels are we talking about?
1,500.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Things have changed and are changing.
You know, I thought the graphic that Kellyanne showed, the attention span, the brain waves, I have seen some articles about how the average time of meetings, like on Teams and Zoom and whatever, it has gone down over time in many companies. The fewer meetings, shorter meetings, less lengthy. The workday still seems to have lengthened out, especially in the US and the UK, by about 2 hours in terms of VPN connectivity times.
Interesting.
But
yeah, very interesting.
And I don't know about y'all, but I was working virtually before COVID-19 hit, but would travel a lot to go to events. So would have been at KubeCon in Amsterdam back in the spring when it was usually going to happen. Kind of get to see people then, which is kind of great. So I don't have a commute that I miss, but one practice I've heard people doing is before, at the beginning and end of their workday, they actually go outside and like take a lap around their house or around their block to kind of have the marking that beginning and end of the workday. And that's something I'm like, I've tried it. It's not a bad idea.
I have something similar. I turn off the lights in my office, and then I don't go back in. That's my done for the day. I thought business is closed.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Here's a rule from the American Association of Ophthalmology. If you spend your time in front of a screen, they call it the 20-20-20 rule. Every 20 minutes, you should force yourself to focus on something at least 20 feet away for 20 seconds. It's just kind of an eye exercise. And as a knowledge worker, you kind of think like your sight is like one of the keenest senses that you have. I mean, trying to do our kind of jobs and be productive in the absence of sight is almost inconceivable to me personally. But I don't do any,
very high bandwidth channel for us. For sure.
Something I've also noticed too, Sam, is used to hear folks that would say, I can't work from home. It's not a productive environment. you don't hear that anymore. Folks have figured out a way to do it.
Well, is that like a resignation? I mean, how close is
Right.
that?
Yeah, exactly. That would be a different, saying something different today than it would have been.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I really do enjoy is the fact that I'm on calls with people. And like before, when we were just prepping, I had my son walk into the room and people don't, raise their eyebrows and go, my God, this person has a family life, or there's other people in the household also at this time. So I think that that's a very refreshing thing. I've worked from home for a long time, and I was always very conscious of interruptions into the workday. And now I'm sort of treating it like, well, work is interrupting into my life, to Kellyanne's point. And so I think that that's
it is the fact that we really are inviting each other into our homes.
Yeah.
And it used to be shriek and horror if that happened, Sam, right? The doorbell rang or whatever. Now that's life. It's blended together, as you were talking about. Work has become life. Life is work.
So I brought up this other, the next prompt. We talked a little bit about how communication and collaboration patterns have changed within your organization or within your family. What about with your customers, or what about with your partners? How is communication changing with those different cohorts? So thoughts on that? Anyone else? Anyone want to start that one?
I'll chime in.
Mark.
It's kind of related. So, most of the startup companies here have been forced to shift all of their field marketing activities online, right? Because you can't have like morning breakfast and invite in prospects, or an afternoon reception or something like that. And so what's been interesting is the number of registrants. This is a generalization, but in general, the number of people that register is lower, to these kind of online marketing events, which I think is a direct reflection of the Zoom fatigue, and people just can't bring themselves to it. But the interesting thing is the ones that do register and show up, they tend to stay for the entire conversation of the hour. And in the old days, I think with the distractions people had, or for whatever set of reasons, people would sign on, maybe like in this session, listen to Kellyanne's opening remarks, and then somewhere along the way decide, oh, I got to get ready for my meeting at the top of the hour, or I really need another cup of coffee or whatever. And then the attrition would set in, and you'd see like this kind of big ramp down in terms of the number of people that were. But if you it's more of like, I've scheduled another meeting, and I committed my time to this webinar, so I'm going to kind of stick it out unless they do a poor job, and I'll sit through the whole conversation, so it is interesting that you see the numbers go down, but the quality, people are trying to qualify sales leads in this kind of activity. And so I think they're being, maybe equally successful, or their higher quality lead comes out of those kind of activities than has happened in the past.
And I feel like we've also been thrown for a loop in terms of almost like the yearly cycle of things. So August is typically the time when everyone in Europe is on vacation, and yet we had KubeCon Europe. We're doing a webinar right now in August, and there's just been this like slew of online and virtual events that are kind of haven't really stopped, and normally we get that break. Yeah,
and I've also there are folks that I know, like developer relations people, who are always on the road and who are really missing that experience, right? Where there's like, I interact with so many different people, so many different types of people, so many different ideas every day in my normal course of my existence. And now I'm still able to see some of those same people on Twitter or on LinkedIn or whatever. But I don't get the hallway interaction. I don't get the spontaneous communication and ideas that I used to be able to have. I'm sort of doom scrolling as opposed to generative sort of conversation and things of that nature. So it's definitely interesting. And I think that with customers and with partners, trying to figure out how to have that that communication, that collaboration, and make it authentic. It's one of the reasons why we started the Software Delivery Leadership Forum, is that we realized we did these events, the CloudBees Days events that were regional events in every area. And we love that because we got to talk to people. We got to be there face to face and have lunch and share information. And how do we recreate that face-to-face thing with our customers, with the community at large? How do we do that in a COVID world? And so this was one of the things that we tried to try and compensate for that. Again, we're experimenting. It's a hypothesis.
Yeah, interestingly enough, from my perspective, we look at developers and building community and taking events online. We've had some hack fests, and actually those have been really popular. We've had high levels of engagement and very global. You know, we've had like contributions from Nigeria or Pakistan, India. And if we look across kind of all the stats we're seeing for contributions to open source, most projects are at an all-time high for individual developers, certainly the ones I'm involved in, where the company involvement is dropping off. So there's less numbers of companies involved. The people are actually leaning in, so developers are leaning into open source, which is like incredible to see. And you can track it almost, you know, from the beginning of the year, and spikes in March, and yeah, just keeps going.
I mean, if you think about collaboration, asynchronous collaboration, really development is like number one with a bullet. People from all over the world contributing to something and merging that code in and having to interact with other people when merges don't work. I mean, there's so much of that required. I'm wondering maybe how that's changed. People are still distributed. Maybe they're more distributed now. I think the practices of DevOps, we're finally coming around to the practice of DevOps, but the practice of DevOps and continuous delivery, I think those are very much in line. That fast feedback, right? So that if you are communicating and you're putting in source code and it's going the wrong direction, as long as you get fast feedback that's sort of you're going off script, you can help pull that back in. But I think that's a really an amazing example of collaboration and communication, is just the whole source code creation and editing process.
Yeah, if I had time and a means to do this, I would be really interested to see how something like commit messages have changed just in the last 6 months. You know, because that's a form of communication that goes with, you know, the code commit. But also there are folks who have been working on, you know, different, say, like open source projects just in a distributed way. But think about, you know, folks who have been working in the same kind of company and sharing the same office space, and then suddenly they don't have the ability to go explain what happened or try to fix what happened by walking into somebody else's office. So those kind of other ways of just kind of documenting what you did and what you meant to do, like, take on a whole new level of importance.
Yeah, and when people look back at that, it's like the little annotations on the photos from the 1960s or 70s that we used to go back, and that's the magic. Is the photo is magical, but the little annotations where somebody wrote the little note about, oh, this was so much fun, we did this thing, that becomes really an important part of that, of the overall value of that information. That's interesting.
Sam, I think one of the things we kind of forgot to do in this whole process is step back and look at who's already productive working from home before COVID and all that. And there's certainly executives and salespeople and folks in event roles. But my experience was software developers took this on very quickly. Some of it was by necessity because they had to travel, and now they could set up their environment on their laptop and do everything from wherever they are, kind of a work anywhere. And that's actually some research that we're kicking off this week, is the experience of the developers have had and how much has that informed the rest of the organization or still could benefit the rest of the organization. Not saying everybody works the same way, but they've been doing this, you know, for a long time with tools that now everyone else, some of the same tools, have been using. And I don't know that every developer in every company works remotely, but it's pretty frequent.
That's a survey that you're running right now, Mitch?
Yeah, it'll launch either to this afternoon or in the morning. It's just getting kicked off. Yes. Yeah. You can go to the accelerated site to find the link to it at accelst.com. And hope to have
many of the startup companies in the Valley had work from home days for their software engineering teams once a week. And in fact, it was kind of a recruiting tool. And I think, not surprisingly, a lot of times management thought that was going to be a goof off day where people were going to, you know, but the funny thing, if you looked at the code volumes being checked in and out of GitHub, like it was always like 25 to 50% higher on the quote unquote goof off day.
Right.
Because allegedly, you know, people could actually concentrate on some bigger problems and avoid all that. So it's, and the way we've taken the, you know, the work from home one day, we've expanded it to the other 4 days of the week. And now we have like 5 work from home days. And I'm not aware of a single company that hasn't, on the engineering side, that hasn't seen, you know, code generation rates rise by working from home.
Productivity lift, right. And Mitch,
Yeah,
you
again,
earlier
I mean,
about,
you're giving people 2 hours of commuting time typically here, you know, back a day. So whether they're inherently more productive or making better use of their time, or they're just working more because now we're living at work, you know, the jury's out, I think, on the explanation.
Yeah, we
Right.
actually
And
did
Mitch
some research
made a
on that,
comment
Mark,
earlier.
and that was the commute, getting the commute back was the number one reason people said they would like to work from home, either more frequently or permanently. Because, you know, to your point, 2 hours on a commute. Wow. A couple times a day now, you're talking real time.
I was talking to
or
start.
longer if you live in like the Bay Area, I imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was talking to a startup in Tel Aviv, and they told me that by working from home, this guy saved 3.5 hours. And I said to him, Israel isn't that big. How can it take 3.5 hours, you know, a day to commute?
Traffic, I guess.
right. Yeah. And to the point though, about the developers being able to be more productive, and, you know, Mitch, you'd mentioned about their wearing headphones in the office to try and drown out some of the background conversation. Luckily for a lot of the folks who are at home, I think those soundproof headphones are probably still useful. If you've got family, right? If they're roommates or whatever, right? So you still have distractions. There you go, right? You still have distractions you need to drown out. You also have to try and avoid doing the chores that you know you need to do, because it's easier to do the chores than it is to do the work, than to wrap your head around the code that you need to try and solve. I'll just clean some dishes. At least I know I'm getting something done.
I would rather take my cats for a walk than work.
Than do
It's
anything.
true.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And if you look at the charts, people would probably rather be on Netflix than on Zoom. So there you go. Right.
I don't have any data to back this up, but I suspect there are folks who, like, are workaholics that use those things to have a break, and folks who just are tough to motivate, but, you know, okay, right, if I do this, then I'll get some work done. Use it as incentive for either way.
So we've got 8 minutes left. There are a couple different questions. One is, how have tools changed? If anyone wants to cover something around the tooling conversation, or how have DevOps practices helped in this sort of transition time? So I'll put it out.
I'm going to start. I think one of the things that's gotten very popular are these whiteboarding tools. So I know that like Miro and Mural, and I think they're relatively inexpensive as well. So I've seen a surge of interest in those kind of tools. Everything else is all the predictable stuff.
Right.
Yeah, we're seeing lots of tools, just trying to recreate the conference experience and emulate a hallway track. So not just kind of Zoom, but very sophisticated with, you know, booths and different things layered in. And I think, like, I'd love to see that moving more towards like a gaming type immersive experience. At the moment, you can see they've just kind of been pushed into the situation, and it's a bit of lift and shift of conferences. So I expect to see that evolve more, but definitely seeing a lot more different platforms for events.
We've definitely, we've seen a lot of, talking about gaming, kind of like gaming conventions making their way into like the larger kind of software like development world. So, you know, conferences that are using Twitch, and also using Twitch to stream conferences that are happening in video games that are, you know, essentially tech conferences.
Right. Yeah. And Microsoft, I mean, again, it comes down to how do you recreate that human experience of bumping into people, whether you're doing it in some virtual world. Red Dead Redemption, I've seen people doing scrums in Red Dead Redemption. Their teams meet around a campfire and have their meeting. Or Microsoft Teams, I guess they put something where the audience now, they have little pop-up pictures of you and it looks like you're in stadium seating. These are all ways to help give the visual trigger to other humans that there are humans there. This is not just a computer screen. They're actually humans. And I don't know, for the folks who are on the panel or for those who are on Zoom, how often do you look at yourself in the Zoom thing, or how often are you looking at other people? I don't know what is about me, but I'm just always looking at myself. I want to make sure I don't have like a hair going on. I'm not like, but I know what I look like. I don't know why I keep looking at myself. I should look at other people, but I'm just vain. Maybe that's what it is.
Okay. I think there was an APR article about that, and they've conclusively determined that people spend more than half their time on the call looking at themselves. That's been measured.
That's part of the Zoom fatigue.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
Bad,
sure.
That's good to know. I don't feel so bad now.
Right?
Well,
At
Well,
least
you're
I'm
in the 95%
aware.
category. Maybe you were like at the high end of the thing.
I'm self-aware at least enough.
And one of the things, like it kind of almost in response to that, and in terms of how how I've definitely been interacting with my clients differently, is before this we would do all of our calls virtually anyway, and very rarely would people turn on their cameras. We would like watch slide shares and things like that, and then suddenly everybody had to be on camera, and in order to save some of my brain waves for like the actual like tech that we're talking about, I often will just keep that off and encourage folks to keep that off unless there's a really good need to be on camera, like today, so everyone can see my eye contact and my posture and all that other fun stuff.
So interesting. So you're saying that there's more bandwidth able to be put on the topic at hand when you don't have people's faces on the thing. That's interesting.
Yeah, and you can even use the excuse. You can say it's like internet bandwidth, which that also can be an issue. But your brain bandwidth has limits as well.
Yeah.
When this started, we used to kid that this was going to be a holiday for introverts, and it's actually been exactly the opposite. In these kind of forums, the people who are always less vocal and more deferential, not universally, but in many instances, have been far more engaged and have become far more vocal contributors. I even heard this talked about in a sports context. In professional sports leagues, you have the team together physically. There'd be one or two outspoken people in the team meeting, and everybody else would kind of defer to them. And meeting in this kind of a forum, people who were like mice, never been heard from before, started to squeak and speak up. And just to maybe give some tips or advice to some of the people who are listening, I was talking to a woman in the IT group at Dell, and she said that one of the downsides of this kind of communication is that she said we become less sensitive to time zone differences. And in the old days, we would think about like what time is it really in Paris or Malaysia. And she said somehow like our concept of time has been broken down by this work from home Zoom phenomenon. And so we think nothing of imposing on people. And I know you've got a number of folks here joining us, participants who are in many different time zones. But she said, we become much less sensitive to that. We've got to go back to some of the, kind of the implicit ground rules that we used to enforce in the past when we were sitting in Round Rock and now
Probably like doom scrolling anyways, so it's probably fine.
Most people aren't sure what day it is anymore, more or less time zones of other people. Someone's told me only 3 days now, yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Yeah, I've heard it called quarantine. We're just all in quarantine.
Quarantine,
I
right?
like that. I don't remember that.
Friday,
and-
Saturday, same day. It's all,
Same day.
yeah.
And for me, like I'm going to double down on the kind of sentiment that I stopped my talk with, is that the focus on actual people is really important here, because like all these things we're talking about, other people in time zones and this and that. The less we can worry about how we look on the Zoom call and how it is that we're actually kind of performing, and more we can focus on the folks on the other end, right, who we are trying to communicate with and trying to work with. I think that is what helps us get us closer to where we maybe need to be.
Yeah. And we're getting, Alexander was saying, yeah, it's strange. There's really no eye contact, because when I'm looking at, like, if I look at the camera, then I'm not actually experiencing what other people are doing. And so it's awkward to look at the camera. But then if I don't look at the camera, I'm, my eyes are up here. It's kind of a deal. So.
And
One of the
even the
things I
googly eyes that I have on either side of my webcam do not help with that.
They don't help you focus in on it. Oh, interesting. You've got googly eyes. That's an interesting tool.
Yeah.
So, this is technology that you probably didn't have before.
Exactly. Implementing conferencing systems back when that was kind of what we did in conference rooms. is that to put the camera at the eye height of people sitting at the table so that people see you looking at them because you're looking at the camera. And what I've done is actually put my camera on a stand right in front of the screen that's at eye height. So, and then I put U of all directly behind it. So hopefully I'm kind of looking a little left and right, but I'm looking at you. And I think I think it helps with connecting, at least, I don't know, anecdotally it does.
Yeah, no, your setup he's got a good setup. Mitch has got a really good setup. Awesome. We are at time. We had an awesome time communicating and collaborating. The chat was relatively quiet. I do love that that folks were asking questions and getting engaged. That's the whole point of this. I want to thank Kellyanne for putting together the content and helping to lead that charge and the conversation. Certainly collaboration and communication is not going anywhere. We're going to need to figure out how to do it and keep doing it better. Musk is putting satellites in space so that we'll be able to communicate with ourselves even when we're in Mars, which is nice. So we'll have to figure Zoom meetings, which will be good. So Kellyanne, thank you very much. Mark, Mitch, Tracy, thank you all for joining as well. Thanks all of our guests in chat. Really appreciate you being here. We're going to be taking a break next month. We've got DevOps World. If you haven't signed up yet, we have, I think, 8,000 people signed up. We've got a leadership track, community track, practitioner track, something for everybody. So please sign up and join us there. And we'll be coming back with another software delivery leadership forum in October. And we'll be talking about, I believe we're talking about AI, automation, and financial recovery. So if that's something that would be interesting to you, come back and join us. Thank you, everybody.
Good day.
Thanks.